Thank you, Claudio. Let me turn to Chapter 3 on artificial intelligence. AI has taken the world by storm and has set off a gold rush across the economy with an unprecedented pace of adoption and investment in the technology. In Chapter 3, we discuss the impact of AI on the financial sector and the real economy and lay out the implications for central banks. Let me start by putting the technology into a broader context. The technology behind AI can be traced back to the early days of computing itself, but it was the advent of deep learning based on the combination of massive amounts of data and computing power that set the stage for today's AI applications. Today's machine learning models excel at imposing mathematical structure on unstructured data so that the massive computing power of the latest hardware can be unleashed to identify patterns of interest. Perhaps the best known example of imposing mathematical structure on unstructured data is the embedding of words in a vector space so that words become arrays of numbers. The vectors preserve meaning in that similar words are closer together in the vector space. So you see in this slide that the word turtle in red is close to words such as hawk and alligator, but far from words that indicate sports, sledding, boxing, jogging, or for the weather, cloud, monsoon, etc. The latest models take this one step further. Thanks to the so-called transformer architecture, they take account of the surrounding context in the embedding of a word, rather than just having one embedding for each word. Think of the word bond. This word could refer to a fixed income security, a connection or link, as in a family bond, cultural bond, etc., or 007, James Bond. And depending on the context, the vector embedding for the word bond will be different. And you see that example here on this slide. It could lie geometrically close to words such as treasury or yield, or to words such as family or cultural, or perhaps to words such as spy and martini. This ability to take account of context means that the transformer-based large language models are suitable for use cases beyond textual analysis. For instance, central bank applications such as Nowcasting and financial monitoring are amenable to large language models. Just as LLMs are good at guessing the next word in a sentence, given the overall context, they also turn out to be good at guessing the next realization of an economic variable within the broad context of what else is happening in the economy. After all, words are just vectors to large language models. GDP or inflation nowcasting is simply a matter of changing which vectors get processed by the LLM. I will have more to say about this shortly when we look at the central bank use cases of AI. Previous expert systems were tailor-made for specific applications. They needed skilled operators to develop and refine them. Here you see a Go board. Think of AlphaGo, the Go-playing AI system that made headlines in 2016 by beating the world champion Lee Sedol. Systems such as AlphaGo are highly specialized. They're very good at playing Go, but would struggle to answer the question, what would John Maynard Keynes have said? In contrast, the latest AI applications are versatile so-called zero-shot learners, in that they can tackle previously unseen tasks. At worst, they are few-shot learners, in that they only need minimal additional examples to become conversant in a new unfamiliar domain. The source of this versatility lies in the combination of vast reservoirs of data and the massive computing power of the latest generation of hardware. The latest large language models have been trained on the totality of the text and non-text data on the internet, for example. In this way, AI has moved from narrow systems that solve specific tasks to more general systems that deal with a wide range of tasks, and all in ordinary language rather than in specialized code. The financial sector is a particularly promising area for the application of AI. Already, machine learning has made substantial inroads in the business processes of private financial institutions. Examples include credit assessment and lending, assessing damages in insurance, and various applications in asset management. Important use cases also arise in fraud detection and compliance tasks, such as customer verification. These are the same types of operations that have proved useful for central banks in their monitoring activities too. And I will return to this shortly. Now, in all this, is this because AI has some magical ability to see things? Well, the answer is no. The secret ingredient is actually data, and plenty of it. The ability to impose mathematical structure on unstructured data makes AI ideally suited to identify patterns that are otherwise obscured. This ability to find the needle in the haystack, even in previously unseen haystacks, could offer breakthroughs in nowcasting economic activity and in the monitoring of financial systems for the buildup of risks. AI thus stands poised to impact central banks as users of the technology. A key application of large language models is nowcasting real activity or inflation. Traditionally, nowcasting has been held back by the limited availability of timely data and the need to develop and train models for narrowly defined tasks. Large language models could help overcome the narrow scope of previous nowcasting models. As versatile zero-shot learners, they can provide forecasts or nowcasts without fine-tuning, and so find needles in previously unseen haystacks. And just as large language models are trained to guess the next word in a sentence using a vast database of textual information, macroeconomic forecasting or nowcasting models can use the same techniques to forecast the next numerical observation of an economic variable. For AI, after all, it's all just arrays of numbers. They're just vectors. And the pattern recognition abilities that apply to words could equally be applied to statistical series. Combining time series data with other forms of unstructured data could further enhance the capabilities of nowcasting models. Adding non-standard data, such as satellite images, text from social media, and so on, could provide additional context for the numerical time series data. The AI model could then be further refined and trained for the nowcasting exercise. Now, although these are all powerful tools, central banks should not succumb to magical thinking, that somehow the tools alone will bring miraculous outcomes. Timely and plentiful data are key to the success of nowcasting applications. Another way to put it is AI excels at finding needles in a haystack, but there needs to be a haystack, and there needs to be needles to be found in the haystack. But perhaps more than in nowcasting, it is in the payment system where AI holds the greatest potential. Money laundering networks exploit the complexity of interconnections across firms, both within and across borders, to obscure the nature of the financial transactions. AI tools can improve the detection of money laundering, as illustrated by Project Aurora from the BIS Innovation Hub. Aurora uses simulated instances of money laundering activities that are sprinkled into the payment data. And then Aurora compares the performance of various machine learning tools with the performance of the prevailing rules-based approach, in order to assess how well the instances of money laundering are sifted out by the various approaches. And the comparison occurs under three scenarios, as you see in the legend here. First, transaction data that are siloed at the bank level, that's the pink. Second, national level pooling of data in blue. And third, cross-border data cooperation using privacy-preserving methods that do not divulge the underlying data to the authorities in other jurisdictions. Now, the results show that machine learning tools outperform the traditional rules-based methods prevalent in most jurisdictions. For instance, this slide shows the comparison when data is siloed at the bank level. We go from 24% to 58%. The pooling of data at the national level gives a further boost to the performance of machine learning methods, as we see here in the blue bars. But most strikingly, machine learning methods really excel when data from different jurisdictions are shared in a privacy-preserving way. The yellow bars in the slide show that data cooperation improves detection dramatically. And for graph neural networks, which is the method used here, the detection rate goes up from 17% to 79%. There are, of course, risks from AI, of which I would like to mention two. First is financial stability. The reliance on the same handful of algorithms could amplify procyclicality and market volatility by exacerbating herding, liquidity hoarding, runs, and fire sales. But AI could also be harnessed for more effective financial stability monitoring. It could also help in building early warning indicators that alert supervisors to emerging pressure points known to be associated with system-wide risks. And on Friday, we had a paper in our annual conference that took a step in this direction. The second risk I'd like to mention is a greater prevalence of cyber attacks. As well as more sophisticated versions of familiar tricks, such as phishing, there could be entirely new sources of cyber risk that exploit weaknesses in large language models to make the model behave in unintended ways or to reveal sensitive information. But here again, just as AI increases cyber risks, it can also be harnessed by cyber defenders in their threat analysis and the monitoring of computer networks. In a recent BIS survey of central bank cyber experts, most central banks deem AI to be either effective or moderately effective at combating cyber attacks, as shown here in the left hand and the center bars on this slide. Very few people say it's ineffective. They believe that AI systems can outperform traditional methods in cybersecurity management, especially in areas such as the automation of routine tasks or threat detection. Let me now turn to the macroeconomic impact. When it comes to the labor market and the macroeconomy, the impact of AI will depend on different channels. For instance, how many workers AI displaces, by how much it raises productivity, and how many new tasks it creates. And the relative strength of these channels will matter for the net effect on employment and on wage dynamics. There are also important implications for inequality and distributional consequences of AI. And there is still a great deal of uncertainty on how all of these effects will play out. What is fairly clear is that AI will expand both aggregate demand and supply, and thereby lead to an increase in output. But the effects on inflationary pressures in the near term depend on the relative impact of aggregate demand versus supply. If households anticipate the higher income tomorrow, they will spend more today, in which case inflationary pressures inflationary pressures depend on whether this additional spending outstrips the supply. Conversely, when there is less anticipation, AI will be less inflationary in the short run, and central banks will need to be attuned to all of these dynamics. But more generally, now is the time for central banks to put together an action plan to respond to the many challenges that await them as users of the technology. On top of this list is the central bank's role in collecting and using data. Traditionally, most data were collected and hosted within statistical agencies, including the central bank, with clearly defined access rights. And public institutions have traditionally acted as data providers to private sector firms and to the general public. And indeed, our intuition for data appeals to existing structured data sets organized around traditional statistical classifications. But in the age of AI, central banks will rely increasingly on unstructured data drawn from all walks of life, and with more and more of this collected by autonomous AI agents. So for this reason, central banks will need to broaden their conception of data and the role of central banks in this new environment. Central banks are already using AI and unstructured data in their operations, but much of the unstructured data reside in the hands of the private sector, which increasingly acts as a data provider. So one important question is how much central banks would rely on in-house data and how much they have to source externally. Another key challenge is setting up the necessary IT infrastructure. We know that this is very expensive, but crucial in the age of AI. Staffing also arises as a key priority, and the challenge of having the right mix of skills will only grow. So how can central banks step up to address these challenges? For one, the rising importance of data and emergence of new data sources call for even greater attention to sound data governance practices. Another issue is the importance of metadata, or the data about the data. In the future, data will be assembled increasingly by autonomous machine learning applications that need to be guided on what to look for. Metadata frameworks are hence crucial for data retrieval as well as better comparability. In all of these tasks, cooperation among central banks will play an increasingly important role in meeting the challenges in the age of AI. For one, the pooling of resources and knowledge can help to mitigate resource constraints and thereby lower the barriers for central banks in using AI tools. In particular, central banks would benefit from sharing domain-adapted or even fine-tuned models. Central banks face very similar problems and indeed face the same global shocks. Domain-adapted models that are subsequently fine-tuned by each jurisdiction would allow central banks to benefit from leading-edge models while addressing homegrown issues. Duplication could be reduced substantially, and the costs of trial and error could be defrayed across many central banks. Drawing lessons and comparing notes on policy issues would also yield great benefits. These interactions would better prepare central banks to play their roles as data producers, users, and disseminators. As you know, central banks have a history of successful cooperation in overcoming new challenges. In the era of AI, they're very well placed to expand cooperation in the fields of data and data governance, as well as in the technology itself. Let me conclude. For the reasons I have outlined today, there is an urgent need for central banks to come together to foster a community of practice in artificial intelligence. In this community, central banks can share knowledge, data, best practices, and the AI tools. We should have no illusions about the scale of the efforts needed to harness the full potential of artificial intelligence, but the fruits of such cooperation will be considerable. The track record of successful cooperation by central banks should give us hope that the challenges can be met successfully. And as always, the BIS stands ready to play its part to support central banks in this important endeavor.
Thank you very much, Hyun. Well, thank you all very much. Now the floor is open for any questions, comments.